Hey,
Dr. John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn, a prominent psychologist, and co-host of the podcast Shrinking Trump. Doctor, nice to see you again.
yeah, good to see you again too. I wish we were
So we
under
spoke.
better circumstances.
Well, we're not in camp, so I mean that's one step. It could be worse, right? We could be put someplace.
Yeah, on our
Look at
podcast,
that.
we always have a humor section at the end, and so one of our humor sections was Harry and I pretending that we were now prisoners in El Salvador, and we had to do comic shtick to keep the prisoners from killing us. So it's like, hey,
Right.
I told the ICE agent take my wife, and she did.
That's funny. This is, I'd work on the material because that could happen. We don't know how this is going to play
I
out.
got to work on my
So
10
look,
minutes.
I
It's gonna
want to
happen, but
go through with what you warned us of and everything last year, but
yeah,
I just
yeah,
want to ask your gut reaction to something that we're seeing right now.
yeah.
If you haven't seen it, Donald Trump announced in his post on his ridiculous platform, there's been a total, complete ceasefire. Congratulations to everyone. That's what I'm not joking. He really wrote this a short time ago. God bless everyone, blah, blah, blah. It sounds like the end of a Christmas carol. God bless Iran. God bless Israel, the Middle East. God bless the world, all this stuff. But in Israeli media, they're not reporting this as a ceasefire. And all they're reporting is Donald Trump claims a ceasefire. In fact, the Israeli cabinet right now is meeting to discuss this. Is the likely scenario, and again, we don't know, we'll have an answer, but know what you do about Donald Trump and his ego and narcissism. Is it him just trying
Right.
to take credit for something before it's even been announced and actually the signs, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted type of thing?
Well, now I have to admit, Dean, I actually was working today. So, the problem with this Trump business is you turn your head for literally like half a day, and there's been a new outrage or crisis or folly. So I'm actually
Right.
not up on the latest thing. But he likes to claim credit, of course, whether it's true or not. Whether it's happening or not, whether he had anything to do with it or not. So when he's claiming credit for something, you have no way of knowing if there's any connection between that and reality because he'll just, he's claiming he should get the Nobel Peace Prize, you know.
Right. Right. And by the way, so according to Ynet, this is all happening in real time. The Ynet, which is an Israeli paper, they said senior Iranian official confirms to Reuters we agreed to a ceasefire proposal with Qatar's mediation. So, so it looks like there's going to be a ceasefire, and it looks like
Okay.
what Trump did is what we are saying. He wanted to get ahead of it and announce it so that he can get the Nobel Peace Prize in his mind, and he can put up on at his country club right next to the golf club tournament thing that he didn't really win, but they gave him the trophy anyway.
Yeah,
So
right.
he'll get the Nobel Peace Prize participation trophy for doing one bombing and then saying, "It's peace. Look, I got you peace, everybody." He's a hero in his
Right.
own mind. He's amazing, isn't he?
Yeah, he is a hero in his own mind. That's a great way of putting it. And just like those golf trophies are fake, maybe he'll put some like counterfeit Nobel Prize on the wall too.
Right. He doesn't need to actually win one. That's a good point, Doctor. He can just put it up there and say he won. That's all that really matters. So, all right. So let's remind people you were on a couple times last year and in the fall warning people. And at the time, more than 500 licensed mental professionals joined in a petition warning Trump evidence is a kind of cognitive impairment seen in dementia. What was concerning you then last year?
Well, this is something that I've been following for a long time. We had published some op-eds back in 2019 about Trump's showing signs, early signs of dementia, and basically what we see is what we see in the classic signs of dementia, which is a gross deterioration from someone's baseline in functioning. That's very important because one of the areas that we can most visibly see this is in his verbal productions. And if you go back and look
Hmm.
at film from the 1980s, he actually was extremely articulate. He was still a jerk, but he was able to express himself in polished paragraphs. And now he really has trouble completing a thought. And that's a huge deterioration. His vocabulary has deteriorated, but also he's starting to show very specific signs of dementia, something called phonemic paraphasias, for example, where he routinely can't say an English word, so he substitutes a non-word that's easier to pronounce that sounds like it. Most recently this week, he and like I say, he does this. He's constantly doing this. We have dozens and dozens of examples. Just this week at his pathetic parade, which we like to make fun of on our show, we sang "It's my parade," and I'll scowl if I want to because nobody came. Um, but at his
Scowl. Yeah, that's right.
but at his pathetic parade, he said infantrymen instead of infantrymen. It's not a big thing, but it's a diagnostic sign, and this is why it is important to have
Hmm.
like doctors evaluating these things, that people don't do that. They don't, yeah, you and I, we have memory problems. We're getting older. We forget things. That's not the same as starting to use non-English words to substitute for English words because we have trouble forming the whole word. But he has trouble forming a whole concept. And one of the things that
Mhm.
you and I talked about before the election is like, oh my God, what would happen if we had a president with dementia? What would that be like? Well, we're starting to see that. One thing is we're starting to see people cover for him in the sense that everyone sort of, it's like the emperor's new clothes. Everyone's acting like it's perfectly normal when he says these completely crazy things. Like, remember when some reporter asked him about, Harvard and academic freedom? He went on to say, well, in Harlem,
Mhm.
the people really love me. I mean, I got a lot of the black vote, but they don't like what's happening in Harvard either. That's why they're protesting in Harlem. I mean, he got Harlem confused with Harvard because they sound alike, and maybe because the reporter
Wow.
asked him was black. But he's not just mishearing the word, like, oh, I thought you said Harlem. Then he goes back to the people in Harlem who are actually protesting what's happening at Harvard. So it's like how he does the weave. The weave was a brilliant
Mhm.
way he had for explaining his thought disorder. It's not a weave, okay? It's really an example of what we call tangential thought, where he goes off on loose associations, right? So Harvard
Hmm.
sounds like Harlem. Harlem, now he gets into a whole thing about black voters. Then he somehow comes back. He remembers it did have something to do with Harvard. So now he's got to circle back to Harvard. But now the people in Harlem are protesting what's happening at Harvard. So he gums it together into this sort of confabulated story, right? That kind of weaves his loose associations together. And then we all just, and then you see the reporters looking really like confused, like while he's talking. And then people just go on and ask another question, as if we didn't just witness
Sure.
an example of thought disorder.
So, how should the media responsibly cover that?
Well, by covering it, for one thing, they're not covering it at all.
Mhm.
I mean, look, before the election, we had an enormous amount of trouble getting them to address Trump's cognitive decline. They were very focused on
Right.
Biden's, and that's a whole other story. But they
Mhm.
ignored Trump's. And now that he's president and he's intimidating all of these media outlets, right? They're terrified of him. And so they're much even more afraid to make any reference to his cognitive decline. And so even when it's in a kind of 3D, grotesque way, right in front of our eyes, it's just everyone's turning a blind eye to it.
It's interesting that you say that because the media is not writing stories that go, like he said this week and last week that and the week before and connecting the dots and going, there's something here concerning. Instead,
Yeah.
and part of it, Donald Trump throws so much stuff at everyone every moment of the day. It doesn't end. It's a barrage. Either him or Stephen Miller or others are writing his posts and it gets things going. I'm chatting with Dr. John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn. It flagged a few things for me. One is this that Trump commented recently that the Declaration of Independence was written around the time of the Civil War, that
Yeah.
Trump suggests Putin was present during World War II. And the
Right.
media just glosses over that kind of stuff.
Right. And the thing is that to a doctor or to anyone who's ever had a relative with dementia, this is very
Mm-hmm.
familiar, right? Because these ideas are sort of adjacent to each other in your associative track. So, yeah, the Declaration of Independence, that was about the Revolutionary War. Oh, early American wars. Okay, the Civil War was an early American war. So, but the thing is that it sort of becomes a soup, right? Where you become disoriented
Right.
in time, and so all these things kind of blend together. So Putin is the head of Russia. Russia was our ally in World War II. So Putin fought in World War II, and so why are people so mad at Putin? I mean, he fought in World War II, and he was our ally, and he didn't kept saying Putin fought, as if he was a veteran of World War II. So, in other words, it's crazy. It's what we call confabulation, which is that patients with dementia have gaps in their memory, they have loose associations, and they kind of, yeah, they do a weave, Dean. They do a
Mm-hmm.
weave. They weave these loose associations into a made up story that isn't reality.
From your point of view, as someone who's watched them a lot, now you have the podcast where you talk about shrinking Trump and looking at Trump. Is there objectively more incidents of this now since he's in office from as opposed to like the campaign trail?
Well, I think what's interesting is that a lot of, and we discovered a lot of this was also true with Biden. A lot of what we see has to do with how much they let us see.
Right.
Right. And so there's a lot of obviously attempt to control information, control appearances. And so when you're running the White House, in some ways, actually, it's easier to do that than when you're campaigning. So when he was campaigning and doing these long rallies, every single, he's standing on this podium talking for an hour and a half and he's just babbling half the time, right? I mean, there was so much material. And then for a while, once being president, it kind of went dark. We weren't seeing as much thought disordered material. And people were saying, "Oh, I thought you said he was demented. What's happening?" And we kept saying, "Well, they're hiding him." But now you see it's starting to come out. You don't think that the Declaration of Independence started the Civil War if you're a compos mentis adult.
So there are other times though we see him and he seems lucid. He does seem like
Sure.
things are together.
Absolutely.
We only get glimmers of the guy, right? We don't work with him. If someone who actually worked with him would tell us what they're actually seeing all the time. But is it consistent with having some early dementia and this kind of severe cognitive decline and still moments of lucidity
Yes,
where you're actually making complete
absolutely.
sense?
Well, if anyone in the audience has ever had a relative with dementia, they will probably be the first to tell you, she's got good days and bad days. It,
Right,
it waxes
exactly.
and wanes. And, sometimes of day it tends to be worse. That's the sundowning phenomenon. And actually, we noticed that he tended to be more thought disordered in his rallies the later in the day they got. That was actually an observation my co-host, Dr. Harry Siegel, made. And then once he mentioned it, we kept seeing it over and over again. So it was kind of interesting. Um,
So we got to keep
but
a look on him for press conferences later in the day type of thing.
well, you'll notice they actually try to schedule as little late in the day as possible. That's one of the things we've started
Right.
noticing. They try to do as much sort of midday scheduling as possible.
I mean, from your point of view, does it look like they're actually hiding Trump from the public when it gets later in the day?
I think they are limiting his later in the day appearances intentionally. I think they are covering up his dementia.
Is there anything consistent with what you're seeing in terms of Kong of the Klein and his burning desire for revenge and how easy he is to like to lash out at reporters? I mean, he used to get upset with reporters before, but there was a playfulness at times to it. There's no playfulness now. He's just a mean, angry man.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're seeing that as well. I'm not sure if you are or not. That's what
Well,
I'm seeing.
no, I agree. And the thing is that so he always had the core severe personality disorder of malignant narcissism. And malignant
Right, right,
narcissism
right.
is the personality disorder that Eric Fromm introduced to explain the psychology of Hitler and other murderous, grandiose dictators like him. And it's the combination of narcissism, as of course, but also paranoia. The feeling that everyone's an enemy who isn't worshiping you, the projection onto ethnic groups or others or anyone who opposes you, seeing them as evil, psychopathy, so a willingness to break laws, norms, to be sort of someone who exploits and hoodwinks and preys on other people, and then finally sadism, taking real pleasure in the degradation and destruction of other people, being a pyromanic, lighting people and things on fire just to watch them burn because you're such a sadist. But the other thing about dementia is whatever personality you have or whatever personality disorder you have, it gets worse. It becomes more primitive, more, as you say, kind of gross, more kind of unnuanced, right? Unfiltered, more impulsive, more paranoid. And so that's why you have like these very nice people at nursing homes that they put on antipsychotics to try to restrain them, which, by the way, I'm totally against. It kills them. So I think that's something that I've been against for years. But I
Oh,
know why they put them on the antipsychotics because they become agitated and violent and impulsive, and they sometimes don't know how to manage them. So I think what we're seeing is that Donald Trump's really has the worst psychiatric condition in some ways that is possible. He's got the worst personality disorder that a person could have. And because he has dementia, that means he's deteriorating. So he's becoming if it's possible, Dean, the worst version of himself.
and that's horrible to think about because he's already been the worst version of whatever that is. I don't know if you noticed this, Doctor. There's a few times, and I saw him recently in Canada at the G7. His body posture is different than it was the first
Yeah.
term. and
Yeah.
things. He's like slunched. He's really hunched over,
Hmm.
like a penguin-esque almost. I mean, to conjure up a vision of how I see it. And he didn't walk with any, he used to walk with an energy like he was bigger than life because he was Donald Trump, right? I don't see that now. I see something else. And I'm not sure if there's anything there from a psychological point of view that you can attribute that to.
Well, yes, because when we talk about deterioration from dementia, I was focusing on language because that's the thing we most observe. But it also, we always see deterioration in motor performance. And that's one of the other things
Oh,
we pointed out before the election. Again, if you look at film, and there isn't that much of it, but we found some of him doing athletic activities when in the 80s. I have film of him playing volleyball. I mean, diving, to dig the ball and popping up and hitting a high shot. He was very coordinated. And now, he really does have trouble getting up the stairs. He does trip and fall. It's not just I hate to do a gotcha thing. Oh, he tripped on the stairs. But no, his gait is slow. He is falling.
yeah.
And the other thing that's actually even more diagnostic, and I had a neurologist point this out, and then several neurologists confirmed it. If you watch the way he walks, he has what they call like a leg swing, where his right leg, he kind of swings it in a semicircle, like it's a dead weight, and he's just kind of swinging it around. It's very apparent in some tape and not so much in others. But that right leg swing is considered to be very diagnostic of a specific type of dementia, frontotemporal dementia. So I've had dementia experts tell me that she's absolutely convinced, Dr. Zoffman told me she's absolutely convinced that it's frontotemporal dementia that he has because of that telltale right leg swing.
So and I think it's important that we don't look at what Trump does in a vacuum. You should look at the big picture. He's only been in office for about 155 days, folks. And you mentioned he fell going up the stairs. Anyone, I could fall going up the stairs, but he fell going up the stairs. His gait is definitely different. He was standing with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, and had the agreement for their trade deal and dropped it. And Starmer had to go down and pick it up because it looked like Trump. I'm not going to say he looked confused. That's not fair. But he just kind of stood there, and maybe it was
Hmm.
from privilege. He thought, okay, I'm bigger than the Prime Minister of the UK. But the Prime Minister of the UK had to pick up the documents. And when you see it together, this is not over years. This is over a really short period of time.
Right.
And I'm glad that you mentioned talk to a neurologist and that you connected motor functions with dementia. And this is important for everyone to see. This is the guy who's in the White House who has control of he's commander in chief. He's got his finger on the button, all that kind of stuff. You don't want him his finger on the button. I wouldn't let him use the remote control at this point. But this is what we're
Right.
dealing with. We got Trump doing this. So what else? What would be signs of further deterioration that are really red flags for us if we start seeing like this or that? Anything else you can tell us?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that the one thing that's you can take to the bank that's absolutely certain is that dementia is a deteriorating illness. So,
Mm-hmm.
as you point out, and other people pointed out, we showed on our shows a really great tape of Gavin Newsom talking about this, saying he's not the same man he was 4 years ago. It's like I've interacted with
Right.
him. He's more than lost a step. He said he can't form a thought. So think about how much he's deteriorated from 4 years ago to now. What you were referring to about the way he's different. And now fast forward another 4 years. And in fact, what else often tends to happen is there is what we call sort of the cliff, where sometimes people get to a certain point and then they just really drop like a stone. So, and I predicted before the election that he would probably fall off the cliff before the end of his term. And at the rate that he's
You
deteriorating,
did.
we'll see. But the point is that it's going to get worse. That's my prediction. All these signs that we've been talking about are going to get more pronounced, become more pronounced. And I don't know. Are we just going to keep normalizing it and normalizing it and normalizing it? I keep thinking there's no bottom now to our normalization, that he could just be sort of babbling and everyone would say, oh, that's Trump or something.
And they're already doing that. That's exactly it. I'm talking with Dr.
Right.
John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn. So, in your opinion, doctor, and you are a psychologist and you cover this all the time, Donald Trump, there's no doubt he will decline more. How fast or slow is beyond our control. But does the fact that he's under at least arguably an intense amount of pressure as president, could that expedite the process of
Oh,
his
sure, sure.
decline?
Stress, absolutely. Stress definitely does hasten the decline. Yeah, you wouldn't want to give the hardest job in the world to somebody who's
Yeah.
fighting a deteriorating neurological condition. Like you need, like It's really insane that we're in this position.
You know, you mentioned Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, a little over a week ago, now we don't even talk about the National Guard. The Marines are in the streets in California, folks. No one's even talking about it anymore.
Yeah.
But Gavin Newsom said Trump never called him to talk about the troops and then send the National Guard. And then when he did get him on the phone, he wanted to talk about anything but that. He was like talking about everything. And he kept, Newsom was like, I kept trying to bring him back to the fact that you're taking away my National Guard, which is such a huge thing. And it wasn't like he wanted to talk about Iran or something else. He didn't want to talk about this. He wanted to talk about whatever else was in his brain. And I
Right.
imagine that is also consistent with a cognitive decline, if not
Sure.
dementia.
Well, sure. Again, if any of you ever visited your relatives and, who are in, memory care, um, you know, if you say, "Hey, mom, there's just one thing I really want. Can we have a discussion about this?" It's going to be hard because she's going to meander, is that what you're saying is going to remind her of something that happened a long time ago, and that's going to make her remind her of something that bothered her yesterday. And then she's going to pull them together. And now she's mad at that friend from 20 years ago because she's relating it to but this is what we're dealing with. So, maybe he just didn't want to answer the question, but also he was probably just meandering and rambling.
He is. That's what he does. So I'll go back to my days as being a litigator in court. I'll say, Dr. John Gartner, in your opinion, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, do you think there'll come a point where Donald Trump will not be able to discharge the powers and duties of his office as president, requiring invoking the 25th Amendment? And the language I just read is from the 25th Amendment.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, he's reminding me of my days as an expert witness. But, well, here's the thing. Will he become impaired enough that they need to invoke the 25th Amendment? Yes. Will they invoke the 25th Amendment? No. And
So
therein
you
lies the
think there will
problem.
become a point where he will become, and again, folks, I'm reading the 25th Amendment, and it says when the president is, quote, unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, that is then not a mandate, but sort of a moral obligation on the cabinet and the vice president to convey to the leaders of Congress that he can't do his job anymore and the power would go to the VP. I don't like J.D. Vance at all. I'm not sure if a competent J.D. Vance is better than an incompetent Donald Trump, but at the same time, that's what I'm talking about, the 25th Amendment. And we don't know. I mean, is it fair? And I'm not trying to do cross-examination or direct examination on you.
No, that's
Even
okay.
though it
Go
sounded like
bring
that.
it.
Is it? No, 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 no. That's not why I'm on your side. You're my witness. Like I have Dr. John Gartner. We've qualified him, Your Honor, as an expert witness. I can ask opinion questions. How many times have I said it to a judge? Many, because I was a litigator for like 6.5 years. I had many expert witnesses, and also cross-examined. We did medical malpractice. We represented doctors through the big insurance carriers in Jersey when I was a lawyer. That was part of the practice I did for several years. But
Oh,
when you look at Donald Trump's decline,
interesting.
we don't know if in a year from now it could be off that cliff moment. It could be 3 years from now.
Yeah,
But
right.
is it likely within 4 years that, based on your experience, is it really uh, beyond normal
Yeah.
activities of people that you can remain off that cliff in 4 years when you're 79 and what he's evidencing now?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, it's not like I'm, have a long career working with, dementia patients, because so I don't have internalized norms of like, oh, once they're like this, then
Okay.
they only got another year before they're off the cliff. So I couldn't responsibly give you an estimate. But what I do see is I see a rock rolling down. I know a rock rolling downhill when I see one, you know.
This is You're being responsible, doctor. This show's called Irresponsible Speculation by Dean Obeidallah. That's what we do every week. We want everyone to be irresponsibly speculating. Yeah. I have you as an expert witness. The judge said you're an expert. You can give an opinion on anything within this area. So bottom line is you do believe at some point he will not be competent and the 25th Amendment should invoke, but it will not be invoked from a political point of
And,
view
and
because I imagine the MAGA base would go ballistic and say it's a
exactly.
coup and you forced
Right.
them out and J.D. Vance will be
Of course.
despised.
Right. If
Yeah.
despised, he'll probably be shot by some terrorist, some domestic homegrown, MAGA terrorist. So the thing is, I said this before the election, but now I think it's really going to happen. We're going to have a weekend at Bernie's White House. They're going to be wheeling him
Yeah.
around, and but don't think that doesn't mean he can't get into trouble. He will, and so I think it's going to be. I don't know. It's going to go from I don't know, from farce to tragedy or tragedy to farce. I don't know, but it's going to get more and more absurd. And so the kind of it'll be like this will be the demented elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. And his poop is going to get stronger and stronger. It's going to be harder and harder not to acknowledge that he's there. But
His
somehow,
poop. So
yeah, yeah,
so
the elephant
so
poop.
instead of throwing
Like
ketchup
they're
against
trying
the
to ignore the
wall, Trump.
elephant.
Right, but are you saying that Trump, instead of throwing ketchup against the wall, might start throwing poop against the wall? And the
I
media
wouldn't.
will not even
Yeah,
cover it. The
right,
media would ignore it. They go
right,
like, "Oh, okay, but Mr. President, what about like there's poop on the wall?" That's how bad corporate media is. But you make a great
yes,
point, Dr. Gartner. The fact that he's used his FCC to target media outlets and to sue them, they're not going to write the story that he has dementia because he will block them out of the White House, like he did the AP, or he will have the FCC investigate them.
that's
And,
right.
and that's the reality of the world. They lose their access and they lose their job for some of these reporters. That's the
Right.
reality. So it's going to be up to the
Mhm.
rest of us. He can't do anything really to me. I mean, he could, but I don't, I'm not a big enough fish yet. When I get put in a camp, I deserve it. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the media. CNN is dying and it's being, sold off. MSNBC is being spun off to be part of this new company. In a year from now, they might both be gone. And I'm not wishing that either. But the
No, that would be
media
a
outlets will
tragedy.
be right. There'll be Fox News on TV and Newsmax, and the rest independent media, which on some level is great. But the only bad thing is there's not the narrative creator. There's not the big like Rachel Maddow has the ability to go
Right.
on and set a tone, and other people have to respond to it on an issue. We would have to collectively do that, and I'm worried for it. I used to love CNN. I wrote for them for 10 years, opinion,
Yeah,
and they so slid as they
I
try to
know.
move to the right, and they lost
I
all the
know.
credibility. And I have to wonder now if they did that on purpose, the right wing owners of it at Warner Brothers,
Oh,
if they want to
absolutely.
destroy
Well,
CNN. They
Liberty
want to destroy
Media,
it.
Liberty Media.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I mean. You talked about this. Reporters don't want to report this story because they could lose their jobs. But at a larger level, look at how he's threatened the corporate parents of all these
Right.
big media companies, right? So CBS, I think he threatened to take away their broadcast license, or was it they were the ones that he threatened to
The
block their
merger.
merger. So
Yeah. The
they're
merger,
totally
Skydance and
separate.
Paramount. Yep.
Right. So Skydance and Paramount. Right. So this was a big corporate merger that the parent company cared about more than they care about whether they how they edit 60 Minutes, And so basically they sacrifice 60 Minutes, to save their larger corporate entity, which is from a corporate shareholder point of view and from actually their business ethics is actually the right call. They're responsible to their shareholders to maintain profits. But that means that if profits come
Hmm.
before, truth, well, they're going to pick the profits. And so it's not like CBS or ABC or CNN is going to want to report a story that's going to cause Trump to go after them. And not just to go after
I
them
know.
for that story, right? But then to use any and every lever of power that he has to destroy their company. And he's got many. And so he has brought them to heel by his ruthlessness, by his willingness to use any and every means necessary to harm them. And they know he'll do it. That's brought universities to heel, law firms to heel,
Hmm.
media outlets to heel. And so as a result, we're in this crazy situation where the mad king has so much power that nobody wants to report on the fact that he's mad. It really is an emperor's new clothes kind of situation.
It's very interesting the way you put that, and you laid that out 100% correct. And for anyone, when Dr. Gartner said that they made the right decision, the companies, what he's getting at that morally it might be wrong, but legally, if you're an officer of a publicly traded company, you have an obligation to increase shareholder price. That's your job. You have a fiduciary duty to shareholders, like legal
Yeah.
obligation to do that. And the result is with a few companies around, as opposed to like 25 or 30 media companies, it's easier to control the media. But now independent media is really exploding. I mean, the last couple of years, with the decline of CNN and MS okay, is doing okay, but CNN's really declined. You've seen so many online now, and I hope that collectively we can end up being the narrative creators of it, and the media narrative sort of the architects of it so that people have to respond, but we'll see. So, Doctor, before I let you go, if people want to hear your podcast, Shrinking Trump. Is it weekly, and where can they go to hear
It's
it?
weekly. It's weekly. We're on the Really American YouTube channel. We're one of the shows on Really American. We live stream every Friday at 3. And the people who watch live have a very lively conversation. I always watch the live stream.
I'll have to go. I'll check that out at 3 o'clock on a Friday. Well, thank you so much, Doctor. Thanks for being on. I always appreciate it. And I think I'll probably write an article about this. Every time I write articles with Dr. Gartner and what he says, people really like it a great deal. I write it for my Substack, so I'll probably write something. But have a good
Okay,
day, my
good,
friend.
good.
Good night.
Love it. And good. I'll be happy to come on again. And by the time I come on
Definitely.
again, right, I'll say, Dean, remember the last time I came on? And
Yeah,
and I said it was
I
to get
know.
worse.
And can you believe? And we should actually June 23rd. We're going to make this as a marker, and maybe in 30 or in 60 days, it just put it in. And here in the last 45 days, here's exactly what we've seen. And that's the important way to make the point to people, because everyone misspeaks. I don't say the right word on times. There are times I might stumble here or there.
Sure,
This is just
sure.
life. But when you put it
Yeah, that's
together
different.
in a period of, like, if you put it all my years, the last 5 years on the radio, like, hey, look, he most spoke here, whatever. If you see it in 2 months,
Oh, yeah.
I think it might paint a picture for people that this is really alarming. And at some point, corporate media, someone's going to cover it. We'll see if it has any traction. But all right, Doctor, nice seeing you, my friend. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too.